Nothing quite appeals to our little human brains as trying to process existential and apocalyptic dread quite like these brainless shamblers. From movies to TV, video games, comics, and yeah, even brands. Okay, maybe it's not exactly Night of the Living Dead, but the number of brands that have been left for dead, only to return 28 days later, or longer, will make you realize that we are really living in a zombie land of brands that could outlive even The Last of Us. For most of us, the first we ever heard about SodaStream was sometime in the last decade, probably around the time Scarlett Johansson was balancing her time between acting as their brand ambassador and helping out Captain America. But what you may not know is that this was SodaStream's second kick at the can, or bottle. The company was actually founded in 1903 and, for its early decades, primarily found in upper-class homes, like quite literally the royal household kind of upper class. It wasn't until the 70s and 80s that the consumer home carbonation product craze really took off. With the tagline, "Get busy with the fizzy," and an emphasis on sugary flavored syrups to go along with the boxy contraption, SodaStream was riding high on the golden era of sodas. Of course, it was only a matter of time before the sugar crash. With the 90s came a health-conscious movement away from high-sugar beverages, and SodaStream's sales fell flat. The company changed hands a few times, and the SodaStream was all but forgotten. Meanwhile, sugary soda sales continued to plummet, hitting a 30-year low in the US in 2015. But a new challenger emerged: sparkling water, or soda water, seltzer. Whatever your regional preference is, it saw a boom, filling the fizzy drinks bubble left behind by their sugary counterparts. SodaStream had just undergone a global relaunch in 2007 with a sleek new design and was fully primed for the seltzer craze that was preparing to peak. The once buried brand took off, and Big Soda took notice. By 2018, the now undead home carbonation behemoth caught the eye of PepsiCo, who acquired the brand for a whopping $3.2 billion. Remember that song from the 90s about getting knocked down and getting up again, never gonna keep? Okay, you know how it goes. Seems like that song may have been the business model for our next zombie brand, American Apparel. This one pretty much starts out with the brand resembling The Walking Dead, shambling through its first 10 years in total obscurity, suffering recurring losses and near extinction, but then American Apparel stages its first comeback, permeating the cultural zeitgeist in the early 2000s after relocating from South Carolina to LA. Touring bands often printed their merch on the American-manufactured shirts. Hipsters caught wind of it, and bada boom, you have yourself a zombie brand success story. But with success comes scrutiny, and boy did this company need some scrutiny. After a litany of sexual harassment allegations and lawsuits starring its CEO starting in the mid-aughts, mixed with a sprinkling of licensing lawsuits, some controversial marketing, and, reporting an $86 million loss in 2010, the writing was pretty much on the wall. But because this was pre-Me Too era, it wasn't until 2014 that the board of directors requested that the CEO take a hike. Cue revival attempt number 2. New leadership, but too little too late. The company files for bankruptcy in 2015. The next attempt to revive the brand is so short-lived that they actually file bankruptcy again just 1 year later in 2016. After being bought by Canadian manufacturer Gildan Brands, there was one more failed attempt at a brick-and-mortar revival starting in 2018, which was pretty quickly abandoned. And yet, American Apparel still lives, except only as an e-commerce brand. The company website drives customers now directly to Amazon to place their purchases. You know how in Marvel movies there always seems to be a point where the hero of the story meets a challenge that pushes them nearly to the brink, almost destroys them, but ultimately pushes them to explode with the biggest, most badass version of their powers yet, while the most iconic song from the score or the soundtrack plays? Well, it turns out that's actually pretty close to the story of Marvel itself. Comic books had captured the imagination of kids and collectors for decades, but by the 90s, the comic book industry wasn't doing so hot. It got so bad that in 1996, Marvel filed for bankruptcy. This cleared the slate for Marvel, but it still had a long way to go before it could make any sort of a financial comeback. A failed attempt at a restaurant chain, along with some late-to-the-party already passé ideas like interactive CD-ROMs and trading cards, and Marvel just couldn't seem to catch a break. Their best bet came from selling off the cinematic rights for their properties. The rights for Blade, X-Men, and Spider-Man all picked up some pocket change for the floundering company, but with a flat fee negotiation for the licensing, Marvel only received a tiny fraction of the box office success these movies saw. Blade, for instance, grossed $70 million at the US domestic box office, but Marvel's take was a mere $25,000. Then, in 2003, the on your left moment hit when a talent agent named David Mizell pitched the idea of an in-house Marvel production studio. And through those portals came the now familiar heroes like Kevin Feige, Robert Downey Jr., and pretty much the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now with over a decade's worth of box office record-smashing hits. The idea of a Marvel production company was a huge gamble that nearly didn't happen. But when it finally became a reality, Marvel and its now parent company Disney became one of the most OP brands on the planet. Speaking of modern-day powerhouses that almost ate it in the 90s, have you heard the one about Apple being saved by an unlikely hero? In the 8 years following 1985, when both Steve Jobs and Wozniak departed the company they had founded, Apple had had its shares of ups and downs, literally. It had a dedicated customer base, some groundbreaking innovations, and a major rivalry with its biggest competitor, Microsoft. We're not going to get too tangled in the intricate web of warring innovators in the pre-dot-com bubble era in this video because both Ashton Kutcher and Michael Fassbender already got to the core of that juicy tale. Let's just skip ahead to 1997 when a combination of poor sales, management drama, and Microsoft's stronghold on the market left Apple mortally wounded. Jobs' new company, Next, I guess? Jobs' new company, Next Incorporated, was acquired early in the year, bringing Jobs back into the fold at Apple as an advisor. Months later, with the company staring down the barrel of bankruptcy, Apple CEO Jill Amelio was ousted by the company board, and Jobs was reinstalled as interim CEO. To save his company, Jobs put on his big boy pants and did the most logical thing he could think of. He reached out to Bill Gates, who was running Microsoft at the time. Microsoft invested in $150 million of Apple stock, effectively saving the company from filing for bankruptcy. But why? Why would one brand invest that much into another brand who just happens to be their biggest competitor? Well, a few reasons actually. For starters, as a part of the agreement, Apple agreed to drop a lawsuit it had been pursuing against Microsoft, which claimed that the latter copied the look and feel of their Mac OS for Windows. Microsoft's Internet Explorer was agreed to be the default web browser on Mac, which is kind of hilarious in retrospect. RIP Explorer. And perhaps most importantly, keeping their biggest competitor alive meant Microsoft could actually get the Department of Justice off their back. See, Microsoft's stranglehold on the market was looking more and more like a monopoly, which is where antitrust laws start to not be so friendly towards your company. So by saving Apple, Microsoft brought balance to the universe, or at least to the fledgling world of technology. With the intense devotion and enthusiasm people have for their most beloved sports teams, it can make it easy to forget that sports are brands too. The story of the Winnipeg Jets revival may be a Canadian triumph, but let's take it back to the grim part of the story, where the first iteration of the brand got, put on ice. Hockey may be touted as being as Canadian as maple pie, but Canada doesn't quite have the stranglehold on the sport that it used to. Boy, I'm gonna hear it for that one. That loosened grip became pretty apparent in the mid-90s as the NHL started to expand its market. While there's plenty of the sport to go around, money on the other hand is a lot more finite. Though the Winnipeg Jets had a devoted and passionate fan base, they weren't the largest or most profitable market in the league. Local rallies raised $14 million Canadian dollars, but it wasn't enough to compete. The team was bought and relocated to Arizona, rebranding as the Phoenix Coyotes. However, the team wasn't exactly profitable in Phoenix either. In 2009, the Coyotes filed for bankruptcy. There was a push for Winnipeg to reclaim the team, but the league was determined to crack the Arizona market, so the Coyotes ultimately stayed put. But the spark to reclaim its place in the NHL was lit, and there was no stopping it. Winnipeg's chance finally came in 2011 when the Atlanta Thrashers were up for relocation. But even after the hard work of acquiring the team was done, the Winnipeg Jets brand was still in question, as the new owners had a few naming options that they were bandying about. In fact, the team's name wasn't announced until the 2011 draft, when co-owner Mark Chipman uttered the phrase, "Our first pick on behalf of the Winnipeg Jets," to wild applause. While the new Jets played in a different arena from the predecessors, with different owners, different players, and a fresh new logo, the love and enthusiasm for the Jets brand made it almost inevitable that it would get a second life. A brand's success is often dependent on the moment that it's in, and if these 5 zombie brands have shown us anything, it's that there are always opportunities for businesses to adapt and meet that moment. It may mean changing your competitive angle, like SodaStream, changing your business model like Marvel, or leaning on nostalgia like the Jets. For brands, death isn't necessarily final, so go get it. What do you think? Any zombie brands that we missed you might want to hear more about? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more sponsored thoughts.